Hello, my name is Stubby Dubins, and in this one I'm going to talk about The Greatest Showman and Wonka. At surface level, the only thing that connects these two films is they are both vaguely 19th century movie musicals starring people with questionable singing talents. But stick with me, I've got more. Let's get started. First, I want to give a short synopsis of each film. Wonka opens with a young Willy Wonka, played by Timothée Chalamet, coming to a new city to make his chocolate. He's confronted with the realities of making chocolate in this new city when he comes up against the chocolate cartel, which is a powerful and ruthless conglomerate that stifles any new chocolate business through intimidation and coercion. He is then tricked into indentured servitude by the evil Scrubbit and Bleacher. While trapped, Willy teams up with his fellow workers to take down Scrubbit and Bleacher and the chocolate cartel. There's also a subplot about Willy's mother and the secret ingredient in her chocolate that she made when he was a kid, but I'll get into that later. The Greatest Showman, on the other hand, is about a real-life person, P.T. Barnum, and his rise to fame and success through the exploitation of marginalized groups. Other stuff happens too. Don't worry about it. The Greatest Showman is about a real person, P.T. Barnum, and it uses elements from his real life to tell its story. Of course, it takes many liberties on how it presents P.T., and there are many YouTube videos that can tell you about that real guy and how terrible he is. So I'm not going to do that here. This movie tries to marry a 19th century story with modern sensibilities, and in my opinion, it just doesn't work. It's very difficult to do this when you're working with a real-life character and trying to capture some of the realities of their story. But on the other hand, you're trying to add in modern attitudes and, in my opinion, questionable value modern pop music. Baz Luhrmann is known for doing this quite well, and there is a reason why. I think this works in Luhrmann's films, mainly Moulin Rouge and The Great Gatsby, is because the subject matter is fictional characters in a historical setting, rather than a real character in a fictional setting. With both movies, there are no real-life people to draw comparisons to. Only real-life people can be viewed as inspiration. Luhrmann also stylizes his movies, which makes the songs and characters seem larger than life and somewhat divorced from reality on purpose. In contrast, The Greatest Showman simply plopped down modern pop music in a 19th century setting, with the only stylizing being, I would argue, pretty bad looking CGI. Another thing that is very awkward about The Greatest Showman is how it adds modern attitudes to a real-life historical setting. In doing this, P.T. Barnum, the character from the movie, is actually kind of sinister, because he knows that racism and discrimination is bad, but at the end of the day, he is acting like a savior to the circus freaks, giving them a better life out of the goodness of his heart, and also using them, and this is the important part, for his own personal gain. And having these modern attitudes in this movie, it seems to imply that Barnum ought to know better, and he's still terrible to these people, and he absolutely does not deserve the redemption arc. In contrast, Willy Wonka is a fictional character, and the movie Wonka is only vaguely 19th century. The city that Wonka takes place is an amalgam of Paris, London, New York, and all of the characters in the movies have different accents, which is never explained. And the music is very much classic Broadway. Despite these elements being contrasting and conflicting, I think it works in Wonka because Wonka is not trying to take place in anywhere specific. It gives you these vague stylistic ideas, but ultimately, the time and place of the movie really doesn't have any bearing on the plot. It doesn't feel out of place, as modern pop music would. Now that I've talked about why I don't think the music of The Greatest Showman works, next I want to talk about the main thesis of each movie, because this is the connecting thread between the two. First, The Greatest Showman. The Greatest Showman creates a world where oppression boils down to a person not simply liking you. The movie posits that the way of overcoming oppression is to simply block out the haters and keep doing your thing. The movie suggests, incorrectly I might add, that oppression is a personal obstacle to overcome rather than a systemic issue where barriers to success are baked into the system of society. The people in power want you to think this way, because then oppression becomes a personal issue that is solved by personal action rather than collective issue that is solved by collective action. Even though the circus freaks seemingly band together and sing "This is me," nothing actually changes. They forgive PT, which, again, he does not deserve, and then out of the goodness of his heart, he is kinder to them, and their quote-unquote freedom is basically performing. There's no evidence that these people's lives have actually changed. They just go from societal outcasts in private to societal outcasts on stage, where the audience is made to believe that performing and getting ridiculed on stage is somehow liberation for these people. This is the thing that actually connects these two films, I would argue, is the theme. Wonka is on the other side of the coin. Wonka presents the systemic barriers that Willy faces in starting his own business very clearly. In the first number of the film, Handful of Dreams, Willy thinks that this is a city where if he works hard and is good at making chocolate, then things will work out for the best. However, at the end of the song, he is penniless,
scratch that, reverse,
sovereignless, and is forced to make a deal that goes against his own interests. This society is one that pushes its lower class further down by design. The characters of Scrubbit and Bleacher take advantage of Willy's naivete and the fact that he can't read for some reason. More on that later. This is a theme of many class-based dramas where members of the lower class turn on each other to fight each other for scraps of the upper class rather than binding together to change the system itself. Great example of this is the movie Parasite, where the Kim family fights people living in the basement for the scraps of the Park family. Spoiler alert for Parasite. Wonka clearly presents the barriers to success that Willy faces in starting his chocolate business. He goes up against a chocolate cartel that has become a pseudo-oligarchy. By cornering the chocolate market, they have also taken control of the police and the church, which they use to stifle any creativity and innovation. Wonka shows us the perils of monopolization of a market, and that ultimately leads to a worse product and a worse consumer experience. Many examples of this can be found in the real world. I'm not going to get into those. This is what Willy is going up against, a system that is hostile towards change of any kind. Willy is ultimately able to defeat this by banding together with his class comrades, not just the people at Scrubbits, but also Hugh Grant's Oompa Loompa. Together, they expose the system for what it is, a corruption that has festered in many facets of society. Willy is ultimately able to succeed not because he blocked out the haters, but because he made systemic change. On a side note, I think it's interesting that in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, the post-cursor of this film, Willy has become the system he sought to change in the first place. This mirrors many real-life examples of our starts that just became what they despised. Cough, cough, baby boomers, cough, cough. In Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Charlie is the younger, lower-class upstart that challenges Willy's system. The theme of Wonka can be summed up as the note that Willy finds in his mother's chocolate bar. Her secret ingredient never mattered. It was always about the people you shared the chocolate with and not the chocolate itself. The note summarizes the idea that Willy cannot achieve success on his own. It does not matter how good his chocolate is. He was never going to succeed without banding together with his friends. This is the direct opposite message of The Greatest Showman. Willy can't just block out the haters and rely on making good chocolate and hope that some good-hearted guy with a circus that will take pity on him and give him a chance. He had to band together with his friends to actually take out the systemic oppression of the chocolate cartel in order to be successful.
Hi, Mrs. Doobie-Doobins here. There are several elements to this story that confuse me.
So I am confusion.
First, Slugworth. Why didn't he just kill baby Noodle? He seemed very concerned about her being alive and able to threaten his inheritance. So why not just have the baby killed? He clearly had no issues with murdering Willy and Noodle by drowning them in the underground vat of chocolate, which, by the way, would contaminate the whole batch, seeing as chocolate with dead human remains in it probably doesn't taste very good. So why not murder her before she can become a problem? Second, adult illiteracy. It's no laughing matter, and I didn't like how this movie included it as a joke. Noodle is an orphan raised by terrible guardians, Scrubbit and Bleacher, who likely would not know how to read themselves, and even if they did, would not bother teaching Noodle, whom they seem to abhor. Noodle's ability to read thus makes no sense, and the implication the movie makes, that her mother was a bookworm, and that she's genetically predisposed to be a bookworm too, is absolutely bonkers. That's not how reading works. You can't be born already knowing how to read, no matter how good your parents' reading genes are. It must be taught. The other point about adult illiteracy. Willie's mother. She clearly knows how to read and write because she writes Willie a note. However, Willie doesn't know how to read, which means that his mother never bothered to teach him. It's fucking cruel of her to give Willie such a heartfelt note, which she damn well knows that his damn can't read. Side note. Willie's mother is seemingly Irish, and presumably the only human that Willie ever interacted with early on in his life. Why on earth does Willie have an American accent if he was only ever around his mother on this boat? Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
In conclusion, Wonka rules, Greatest Showman drools. Thank you and goodbye.